What's up, everybody? Welcome to the For Students podcast. It's me, Ed, one of your hosts. My dear friend and probably your favorite, Kelly Shope, is not here today. She's actually on vacation with her family, off having a blast. So I'm doing this episode solo. But man, am I excited. So many cool things are going on in our organization. We just last week had our very first event, as we're recording this, had our very first event at our fourth school here in Charlotte, and we're so pumped about this partnership with Providence Day School. We had a meeting last week with our Students for Students lead team over at Charlotte Latin School. Lots and lots of cool things happening around the organization. And then today, the interview that I'm jumping into is wild. We go on a wild ride, as my friend Patrick and I would. We get philosophical for a while, and then kind of circle back at the end around this whole idea of what do we do when we're dealing with incredibly difficult things that we feel, and what are we watching people do, and how do we deal with it? But you're going to hear from my friend Patrick Balsley, who is an addiction counselor here in Charlotte, North Carolina. He has his own practice, Sauna Counseling, but then has also launched this beautiful thing that just continues to grow here in Charlotte called Sauna House, this residential space for men who are in recovery and need additional support and are receiving this really beautiful, holistic, and we talk about that word holistic, this holistic kind of approach to really helping them figure out life and be mentored, as well as obviously dealing with these things that they've turned to so that they don't feel these difficult things that they've been dealing with in life. So, man, we go down a few rabbit holes. We really do get kind of deep. We talk about something we rarely talk about, and I think is actually, as far as my experience in the past 4 or 5 years of being in the mental health space, where people don't talk about spirituality very much. So we kind of just barely dip our toes into that idea, but this idea of, man, as human beings and in this age of data and measurement and science, post-enlightenment kind of time where we really want things to be cited. We want to know the measurements. We want to know it's based in evidence-based stuff. But then there's this other idea of this thing inside all of us that seems to be, maybe not inside all of us. I can speak for myself. I can speak for what Patrick says during this episode, this deep longing or this deep sense that there's something more than just what we see and touch and feel. And I often tell people, I'm not certain. I have no way to measure it. I just have what I've experienced. And maybe life really is just this collection of atoms and physics and chemicals and that stuff all interacting. But it sure seems that there's something more. And so we just, for a moment, kind of dive into this idea of what does it mean as to be a whole person, like all these different parts of our lives. And so, this guy, I just love his heart so much, and I think it's why he and I became such good friends and have become such good friends since we met. But he comes and speaks at our events and all of this stuff and comes to our conferences, and he's going to be heading down as one of our communicators, heading down to Atlanta with us as we do our first ever next conference at the end of the year, coming up in May down in Fulton County in the Alpharetta area. But man, I don't know, you'll see. We have such an easy time talking to each other, maybe a little too easy because we could just sit and chat for hours. But it's a fascinating and deep conversation with Patrick Balsley. Check it out. Well, dude, thanks for coming on the podcast. We're just going to swing for the fences. I have no idea where this is going to go.
Me neither. But I'm happy to be here.
I know, man. I'm so pumped that you would show up. And I asked you just like about a week ago, and you're just like, yeah, man, I got this date open. I'm like, bro, let's do it. Let's get in quick. And you've been down.
You know, my answer to everything for students is always yes.
I know. Obviously that creates an affection.
I don't even know why you ask me anymore.
Just like, hey, show up
like, dude,
at this time.
This is what we're doing.
I need you there at this time. 11:30, we're going to record a podcast.
Yeah. You can give me a couple options.
I did.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I asked. I was even like, bro, you have any time. Shoot me when you're available. I'll look on Robbie's schedule and see when there's openings and jump on here.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. So how?
It's good to be back.
Yeah,
here
man,
in
it's good. I
everybody's
imagine,
studios.
dude. It's so.
This place is like
Yeah,
a
so this
second
is
home to me.
I was gonna say, talk about that for a second. Like, I mean, you and Robbie started Champagne Problems. I think I was just asking, like 2021 or something like that.
It was over 3. Wasn't it over 3 years ago? I think 4 years ago.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be over 4. That'd be over 4 years ago now. January 4 years ago. That's crazy. So yeah, you guys started a podcast. You weren't meeting here, but this place came out of
It did.
that podcast.
Robbie's vision.
Yeah.
All of it was Robbie's vision. I just happened to be a part of it in the beginning.
Yeah.
And here we are. And look at this beautiful place.
I know, it's so cool. And the only reason we're here with 4 Students podcast is ultimately, like, if we're to follow that rope back to where it starts, it goes back to you and our relationship with you, and then getting to know Robbie, and like this incredible partnership, and be able to be here at Everybody Studios and record. And so shout out Everybody Studios. It's really cool. Shout out Champagne
Whoop,
Problems podcast. Whoop, whoop. Yeah, man. So how did, if you remember, I remember very clearly how you and I met. But I mean, the first time I ever met you, you're showing up to an event that I'm in charge of. I'm pretty sure that's the first time we met. Is that I had heard Whitney had maybe met someone that knew you well, said you had this incredibly compelling story, and that students needed to hear it. And I knew that I had gotten, because I'm the programming director for this organization. I'm in charge of who we put up in front of students. And I was assured that this guy sharing his story, this would be worthwhile. And this was our second year doing this event at a prep school here in Charlotte. It was outdoors. This is under this coach's pavilion, basically like you think of a park. And you think of like a pavilion that would have picnic tables underneath it or whatever, a couple bathrooms, like a storage closet for whatever equipment the coaches needed, because the fields were right there. Have all these seats set up, chair, microphone, or whatever, and you get up. And I think I found out after the fact that it was the first time that you'd shared your story with students. And you got up and you talked, and I talk for a living. You do too, but like up in front of crowds. And so your pace, I was like, okay, this guy, he's really intentional with his words. He's really taking his time, and I could tell you were walking people through what you were feeling. You were feeling it while you were sharing it. Dude, by the end, not even by the end. I mean, 5 minutes in, we're just like, I'm edging closer and closer to the edge of my seat. My, elbows are on my knees listening to you share the story of growing up here in Charlotte, and your battle with addiction and now recovery and all that. And the students literally gave you a standing ovation at the end of your talk. I don't know if you remember that or not.
No, I don't.
Oh yeah, dude. They jumped up out of their seats. They were so pumped when you shared with them at that point. Cause that was like 3 years ago now, maybe, maybe 4 years ago. Cause we're about to have in May our 5th event. So that was 4 years ago. And, cause you mentioned at the end of that 4 years ago, how many years you had been sober at that time. And I was just like, dude, I love this dude. Like, he's so honest. You were so vulnerable. Yeah. What do you apparently don't remember a whole lot about that day. You didn't remember the standing ovation, but what do you remember about that?
I don't remember. I remember the day, and I remember the pictures more than the day.
Yeah, right.
But I didn't recall that was the first time that we had met.
I thought it was.
It probably was.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember after watching you communicate with the kids and meeting you after and talking to you after, I felt like I had known you for a really long time. And I also remembered after that day and seeing everything that happened at that conference and the way that you guys showed up for the kids, that I was all in on anything you guys were doing from that day on. And yeah, dude, and then it's everything's happened from there.
Yeah.
And 4 Students has obviously grown a lot since then and continues to grow. But yeah, man, I just, and I think I'd talked to, I mean, everything's kind of a blur
Sure.
for me, but in terms of being my first time talking in front of students, I've shared my story so many times in 12-step meetings and treatment centers and stuff. And I've told my story to the kids at Emerald a bunch before that, but I guess kind of like, normal high school kids, that was probably the first time. But, I don't, my story's my story.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I can change, the way that I tell it a little bit depending on who I'm telling it to, but for the most part, it's going to be the same thing no matter who I'm talking to.
Yeah. Well, man, you were just, again, like, it was so heartfelt. It was so very real. And I think students are the best BS detectors there are, I think. But they're also a super critical audience. Like, you got to be on point. They're like, from the moment you step up, they're looking you up and down, like your outfit, your shoe, certainly what shoes you're wearing, all that stuff, it's like, but man, I just, that what you said about feeling like we had known each other. There was there was a kinship, like, right away.
Yeah.
And totally agree. And I remember afterwards, because you had a friend come in and sit there with you. Like, you brought a friend that you knew, I think, from the recovery community, who came there and wanted to support you as you did this and all that. And afterwards meeting him, but meeting you and I hugging, and like, just this brotherhood was just obvious. And I think we cried together that day. We've cried together many times since then.
We did do that a lot.
We're two just freaking baby boys. Whenever we get together, something is meaningful to us, we just can't help but tear up. But yeah, man, it's just been really, really cool. And to what you said earlier, you just said yes, like, again and again and again for us. And we just keep having you back because I think it's the authenticity. It's this deep passion and care for people. And then you also know what you're doing. I mean, how long have you been? So you've been in recovery, how long? And then how long have you had your practice? Because you have sauna counseling, and now you have sauna house. So you have this residential space, like kind of support space. Tell everybody a little bit about that.
So, I got into recovery in June of 2011, and it was my second treatment episode. I went to treatment for the first time. I was 26.
Wow.
And that was in 2008, I guess.
That was your first time you went into treatment?
And I did a 30-day residential treatment episode. Got out of treatment, thought I had everything licked, and I was using within a couple weeks.
Wow. And because back with the same people you were hanging with before, or just different circumstances?
I really underestimated what I was dealing with. And I didn't, it was just ignorance. I wasn't educated enough around what was actually going on with me. And 30 days was just not enough for me to get the type of education and build the support around me to protect me from what I was dealing with. It wasn't enough. And I didn't know that. They didn't know that. I mean, it wasn't anybody's fault.
Sure.
It was just, I was just not set up for success. And by that time in my life, my addiction had progressed. It was pretty serious. And there were some mental health components that had developed due to my substance use that weren't necessarily addressed. So it wasn't what I needed, and then, I started using again and went on another 1.5 year bender. They got really gnarly, and then, family did another intervention in June of 2011 and shipped me down to Florida, and I ended up staying down there for 8 years.
Wow, that's different than 30 days.
Yeah, in Delray Beach, I did a 90-day treatment center, a 90-day treatment and adult diagnosis center down there that addressed both the addiction and the mental health stuff. And by the time I got out of there, a lot of the mental health stuff had cleared up because it was primarily substance-induced. I'd been using for a really long. I'd been using since I was 12, 13.
Yeah, man. Knowing your story, and people don't know it, but I mean, middle school is when you started getting into stuff.
Yeah, so my brain had taken a pretty big hit. it never developed appropriately. I mean, I was constantly using some type of substance from 12 all the way to 28. It never really stopped, except for that 30-day treatment stay in 2008. My brain was being exposed to neurotoxins on a daily basis,
Yeah.
and towards the end, pretty high dosage amounts of all kinds of different stuff. So my brain needed some time to heal, and the 90-day treatment stay really gave me the time that I needed to rest and get that monkey off my back and come up with a clear plan of what the future was going to look like, or the immediate future. And by that time, and this was no cause of my own will. I kind of woke up about 30 days in, because I was detoxing from a bunch of different stuff, and I didn't really sleep at all for the first 30 days of treatment.
Gosh.
Yeah, it was brutal. And when I finally got that first good night of sleep and I woke up, this spirit was awake inside of me. And I just knew that part of my life was finally over. It was done. That book was closed, and I had this new blank slate that I could build a life upon. And I knew that I was safe. I knew that I had all the support that I needed. I knew that I was loved. I knew that I was going to get whatever I needed in order to help me on this new journey. And it just all unfolded from there, because I had been through so much and was in so much physical and emotional pain for so long, and psychological pain for so long. And then all the shame underneath all that of being a 28-year-old man who essentially had been told his entire life how much potential that he had and how great of a person that he was. And I'm sitting in a rehab in Florida with a bunch of people that I don't know. And I'm, $20,000 in credit card debt. I don't have any relationships. I don't have a college degree. I don't have a job. I don't have a home. I'm and all these, my friends that I went to Country Day with are all, getting married, having kids. They've got these careers, and I'm just this freaking loser. I don't know how it happened. I mean, I chalk it up to the grace of God now, because I get that. But in the moment, it was just I could have been, I don't know, engulfed in all that shame and fear and guilt and remorse. But it was all that had just been lifted from me. And I was in this state of perpetual surrender at that time in my life, and they talk about it in the recovery space about the gift of desperation. It's just when you get so desperate and you hit that rock bottom where you'll pretty much do anything to feel better, to get better, or what anybody tells you to do that's going to perpetuate your recovery. I was that guy. I mean, I had gotten to the point, but it was weird for me, because a lot of people, they're also feeling the pain and the shame and the guilt, and that's somehow driving them. But I didn't really feel any of that for some reason. That had been kind of lifted, or it had been spared for some reason for me, and I just felt this overall sense of peace and lightness, and there wasn't any pressure, and that allowed me to embrace recovery in a way that was non-threatening, and and everything just kind of and from that day up until right now, I've felt, and it just makes me want to cry. I felt like the red carpet has just been rolled out. It's just everything, from the people I meet to the books that I read to meetings that I go to the businesses that we've started, and it's just like it's almost been like effortless. It's been, and I know that that's crazy
Right.
when you like from somebody like you that's like been watching what we do, but I feel like I've been in this constant state of surrender, and everything just kind of happens, and that's the beauty of recovery. And anybody that I've ever known that's thrived in recovery, it works like that. You come in, it's like you'll hear this stuff in the recovery space too. It's like you give up one thing for, you can give up everything for one thing, or you can give up one thing for everything. And it's like if you can just let it go. I felt like that's kind of what happened to me. It was like that book closed, that part of my life died, and I became this new person. And when that happened, or I didn't really become this new person, I became who I always was.
Right.
Minus all the drugs and stuff that I didn't need. And then the world just kind of opened up, and it was like, here, now you can do whatever you want. And I was fortunate to be in a place where my entire life had been about drugs and addiction and desperation, and then it just like threw me to the other side of the spectrum, where it was like, all right, well, now your life's going to be all about recovery. And thank God that's how it happened, because I've always been a pretty passionate person, and people may equate that to addiction in and of itself, of like being obsessed with one thing after another. But I've had a pretty good love affair with this recovery thing, I feel like, over the last almost 14 years, and I feel like it's been pretty productive.
Yeah, no joke.
So I can't even, we could sit here all day and I could tell you about all the awesome stuff that's happened, and the people that I've gotten to meet, and the stories that I've gotten to be a part of. But yeah, it's just like every person that I've ever met that's been able to surrender to this idea of recovery, and not kind of like picked and chosen their path, I guess, or kind of like still tried to control parts of it. Everybody that I've ever known that's come in and been like, all right, I'll do whatever I need to do. Like, tell me what to do. Like, those are all the ones that are just crushing. And I think for me, and we can get into more of this, but I don't separate recovery from life.
Yeah,
like the spiritual, the spiritual principles that are taught in most recovery landscapes or recovery type modalities are universal. They're not. It's not. And I have this conversation with guys in my office almost every day. It's like people try to compartmentalize mental health recovery, addiction recovery from life, and it's like, no, if you know the secrets to life, you're gonna have mental health. You're not gonna want to use, it's the same thing. There's no separation between it. And that's how I look at recovery now, holistically. It's just like it's really not any different than just living a really healthy, purpose-driven life. I mean, it's not recovery specific. You know what I mean? So, and I think that's where, I don't want to, we can go down this rabbit hole, but
dude, I'll follow you down rabbit holes.
Yeah, but it's my new passion and obsession around the whole recovery thing is to make it more about life and less about this like affliction that we have. And creating a narrative where the idea of addiction is not taboo, and to where, if everybody's honest with themselves and we're looking at things truthfully, addiction is present in everybody's life.
Right.
And from the way that I see it, it's the worst public health crisis that we've ever had. It's present in almost everything, from the top down and the bottom up. Again, I don't want to. Well, we're going there, I guess.
We'll see. Let's do it.
From the greed and the power at the top. That operates out of an energy of addiction, and all the lack and all the desperation at the bottom that ends up fueling our need to consume. That's all addiction, and it's just this cycle, and it's unfortunately it is developed into the culture that we live in.
More.
Yeah.
And I've heard people in the recovery community say, more of what doesn't work.
Yeah.
Just give me more. I just need more of that. It hasn't helped me in the past, but if I had more of it, then it would help me this time.
And it's just this paradigm that we stay stuck in that perpetuates our system, and everyone's kind of a victim to it until you make the conscious decision to not live inside that paradigm anymore.
Dude, you've spoken about some of these big ideas a couple of times. And before we go any further, I'm curious because you said like the idea of recovery. So to you, there's something there that has handles to it, that you see it as something that can be described, this idea of discovery or recovery. And then you also said, if you know the keys to life or the tricks, though, I don't remember what you phrased, but if you kind of know these pieces about life, then recovery, it's all wrapped up. This whole thing is wrapped up into one thing.
It's the same thing. It's like 12-step recovery.
Okay.
The principles of AA were derived from a Christian organization called the Oxford Group, which was a secret society.
Okay.
It didn't have anything to do with addiction.
Okay.
This stuff has been passed down through spiritual teachers, through, spiritual organizations forever.
So for you, this idea of the whole life, a holistic life, because I think you're going to be episode like 5 or 6 or something like that on the podcast. We haven't gotten into spirituality, obviously. Like we've been sticking with, stories of students and principles of psychology and all of this stuff. Yeah. But a holistic being includes, in your estimation, the way you're looking at this, the way you've experienced this, the way you're leading your guys, and certainly the community of AA, the spirit or something that we can't quite quantify or measure or whatever has to be included in this idea of the keys to life and certainly of recovery. Because I know there's this thing of calling on a higher power or something like that in the recovery community, but
this may not answer this question, but when I think about holistic living, and look, I wish I spent more time, and hopefully I'll get there in the next couple of years to be able to get some of my thoughts on paper more and really.
You got a couple irons in the fire right now to be trying to write a book.
Or organize my thoughts a little bit better. But we don't do a very good job of collectively as a society of looking at things holistically, because it's super complex.
Right.
We have, and when I think about this through the addiction and mental health lens, we have the physical side, that's usually treated by the medical community, and then we have the mental side that's usually treated by, maybe some in the medical community, some crossover in the therapeutic community, and then we have like the emotional side, which is also treated some kind of crossover between the mental health community or the therapeutic community, and then maybe some of the spiritual community. And there's some crossover between these, but we don't it's kind of like we're not really set up to be able to operate within all these different modalities, and we a lot of times we only get plugged into like one or two of them when we need the physical, the mental, the emotional, the the social or cultural, and then the spiritual, and we need all of that stuff for it to really get us into a place of whole health. And it's really hard because a lot of these different kind of like modalities or modes of healing, if you will, we only get one or two of them.
Sure.
And it's really hard to get kind of all of them in one place, and especially, with all the distractions and.
Oh gosh.
I mean, like when I.
Endless offerings.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, it's to think about becoming a professional or an expert in any, in any of these fields. Yeah. And there certainly is a huge chasm between, unfortunately, in my opinion, between the academic or scientific community and the spiritual community. Because one thing relies on empiricism and the measurements and all of this stuff. And the other part is talking about things that we can't see or measure or whatever, we just experience. So it's this very experiential and therefore can be very relative around how do I know what you're experiencing would be helpful for me and all of that. But as you're talking about this stuff, certainly, to use the word pathology, there's so many like illnesses and people like suffering in every part of in every group of people we know. Yeah. There's people that are struggling in some way or another, and most of the time we don't even know that they're struggling, right? Because the whole thing is to present this capable person, successful person, and we have these markers for success that some of them you mentioned a little bit earlier, and it's like certainly we want to achieve, we want to be successful, but this idea that bringing someone along or inviting people into what would holistic health look like is a difficult thing to do because you would have to go to so many different individuals, it feels like, or find someone that would mentor you that seems to have it together, that seems to at least have a handle or an understanding or at least be involved in some way in all these different spaces. Yeah. And I guess maybe that's what you're talking about when you talk about these keys to life. Like, who are these people or what are these things where you're checking off? I think of them like spokes on a wheel. I had a friend that always talked about, where am I in my career? How do I feel? What do I want? Where am I hurting or whatever? Career, friendship, finances, physical health, spiritual health, intellectual, pursuits, hobbies. Like, there were all of these different spokes that he would think about life and then would check in. Yeah. And kind of do these measurements on where am I in each of those.
And that's kind of where I am in my own personal journey. Like I have different people that I go to for all those different modalities, or those different parts of life. And I Robbie will probably get a kick out of this. We had a couple episodes where we were talking about experts on champagne problems and I was just like, Huh. Like, I don't, anybody that tries to tell, that says they're an expert in something, I've always been.
Immediately suspicious?
No, I think that it's arrogant to think that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what the hell's going on.
But these people have studied and they know a lot more about something than someone else. Like, I feel, and you have had this conversation. Like, I am 51 years old, all this life experience. I'm figuring things out. I can share what I have experienced. But I've told you, I'm like, man, I think I may go back and get my master's in psychology or get a degree, get a counseling, degree or something like that, where I would feel more equipped now that I'm in this space. I'm an educator. I have my lived experience. I watch. I feel like I'm not real smart, but I'm fairly smart. I can figure stuff out, notice patterns, but I want to be a better equipped in these certain moments to feel that I'm speaking with and have the authority to speak to some of these things that we're constantly, talking to students about and trying to help students thrive in these spaces.
This is where the holistic part comes in. And this is where, like, these areas of expertise are only, a small percentage of the holistic
of the person
picture.
Yeah, sure.
So and that's where I get a little jaded when and again, this is all about educating people to me, and getting people to understand that there's more to mental health than seeing a psychiatrist, or there's more to emotional health than seeing a therapist, or
more to recovery than just getting off this substance.
than just going to AA or getting all, and it's again, I don't think it's malicious.
Oh, certainly not.
And I don't,
we know these people in all these fields.
I don't think anybody's trying to fool
people.
anybody. But I think, like, when I say, if I went around and told everybody that I was an expert in addiction recovery, and they come to see me, and I don't get them what they need, then obviously that's not my fault. It's your fault. Because maybe that sounds weird. But I think that the human condition is way too complex, and there's still so much that we don't know about so many things. It's never sat right with me for somebody to, especially in the helping fields, for us to say that we're an expert in something and not to follow that up with, but I only know about this little sliver of what's going on with you.
Yeah.
Because it may be a little bit more complex than that.
Yeah.
I don't. It's never really sat right with me.
But again, like, I think, and it's funny you're saying this, because I think there's no one we know that we partner with that would say they're and I'd never put this together. I think there is a certain level of humility around every person that we choose to work with and that we enjoy being around. And I don't think any of these people that we love and have lunch with and come and speak at our events or come and, and do things with your guys in your program, like, none of them would be like, oh, I'm an expert. And so maybe, I don't know if that's part of it.
I mean, so this brings me back to the whole idea of recovery and life principles being the same thing. They talk about a lot in addiction recovery, the idea of honesty being the most important principle. But a lot of times we can't be honest with ourselves, or we lie to ourselves and we don't even know it. And to me now, from where I am in my process and my journey, I feel like the most important principle to ongoing recovery is humility. And the way that I look at humility is pretty simple, and that's just knowing that there's a lot of stuff that I don't know. And it really comes down to that, and being radically open-minded and coming at things with the basic understanding that I don't know anything. And, if I'm presented with new information that is better than what I already have, like, what I already have is now going to die, and the new stuff's replacing it. And to me, that's the underlying kind of stream of growth and recovery is if you kind of operate from that space, you're now this brings it to the higher power thing too. To me, it's like that. To me, is the connection to a power greater than yourself. Because if I think about myself as this, like, finite, spirit or what have you, or soul that carries, like, a certain amount of finite information, if you can kind of put that off to the side and connect to, all that is, or all the information that exists, or allow yourself at least to be open to receiving something new, what's higher than that? Or I haven't come to an understanding of anything that makes more sense than that. And if we all could operate like that and not be so certain that we know what's right, or what works for us may not work for somebody else, I think that is the ultimate formula for a lot of really fast growth happening, especially in life or the recovery side. I mean, you approach anything with radical humility like that, you're going to get what you need pretty much all the time, because you're going to be you're ready to receive it, you know?
It's funny, man. I've done a lot of journaling, and one of the things when I came on staff with Whitney was she had me do my coaching training. So I got a coaching certificate from a school in Atlanta, and coached some clients and all of that. But one of the things that I started thinking about was if I were to like help people find center, if I were to create a retreat, what are some of the principles, like core, just 3 or 4 things that I could walk some people through, introduce these ideas, and send them off to explore? And humility was the first one. It's I don't know when it occurred to me, but like wisdom seems to be this thing that it's a willingness to acknowledge and an awareness of how reality actually is. That's what wisdom seems like to me. You can have all the information you want, but if you don't know how it plays within all of the way it works out and plays out, that information doesn't help you a whole lot. Wisdom is this acknowledgement not only of what you know, but who you are in the knowing and all of that. And humility seemed to me to be the beginning on the journey to find that out, is to, kind of just agree with, and I resonate deeply with what you're saying around humility. It's one of these first key components to anything. And I think walking in a room, assuming that there's something there that you can learn, there's people there that can add value to you, there's things to be thankful for and grateful for that, that other people are not experiencing, or you haven't experienced before, or you thought you never would again, and you get to experience it again. There's a lot of things that come out of this space of knowing you are not the center of the universe. And no matter how amazing you become, no matter how much of an expert you become in something, there's going to be someone that knows more, or you're going to have to reshuffle your information when new information comes to light.
I think that whatever the heck is happening here is so much more complex than we think we know.
Dude, we're getting so like philosophical and deep in all of this. But I think you and I both kind of live. No, we just live. I think you and I both, it's why this happens is because I think you know me, I know you, and we both have these giant umbrella meta thoughts all the time about like, what are we actually up to? And it's funny that you said this about the ideas and if new information shows up. Adam Grant, I really like this guy, this thinker, professor, writer. But he just put out a video, I think yesterday or the day before, it said something like about our ideas, that unfortunately we begin to equate ourselves with our ideas. And I think if that's true, as I know that it is, when our ideas start to be undermined in some way, we feel deeply threatened by that. We feel, we become incredibly defensive around those things, and we fight to the death over our ideas. In this very politicized climate, and all this polarization we're seeing, that's definitely true. But he said it's better to think of our ideas. He's like, I like to think about it like a wardrobe, and as an idea gets old or whatever, I'm just, that's gone. Now I'm going to this new thing. I'm going to hang this new thing up in my wardrobe now. It's like, just let it go. That wasn't you, just an idea.
Yeah.
But
and that idea of safety.
Yeah, that allowed you'll be okay if you do that.
Threatening our safety. I mean, that's just, I don't want to get into the political stuff, but it's a perfect example. I mean, you see all this hostility on both sides, and nobody knows what the hell's going on. I mean, we have such a lack of information, and there's so much information out there.
Yeah.
Like, it's impossible for us to be able to, really have any kind of clarity around what's happening in the world right now to make any kind of, and again, this is my opinion. I hope, sorry if I offend anybody, but like to make a assumption that we know the whole picture, or can see the whole picture. It's so bad for our mental health.
Well, it's funny you say that, man, because I literally, I'm in the shower. My wife's getting ready to go off to her studio, and I'm talking to her out of the shower and just be like, I'm stressed out. And I was feeling stressed out. We have our second event at Providence Day tomorrow, so I'm kind of pumped about it. The first one went great. It's cool to be getting to work with them. I was coming to hang out with you. I was pumped to talk with you, but man, you know so many things. I respect you so much. You have so much influence and different things that you and I could talk about. I was like, just that feeling of like, man, I hope this is a great conversation today. I hope it's helpful for people to listen to. There's been all of this political stuff, big speech last night, to the joint Congress is all together, and I just found myself with a lot of things spinning through my brain this morning.
Yeah.
And this thing just keeps coming back to my mind that, like, not that long ago, a really short time ago, actually, certainly as far as like human time or like certainly as far as geological time is concerned, man, all we knew were the 40 people in our village.
Mm-hmm.
And every once in a while we'd get news from someone came from another village to tell us about it. And that's all the news we knew. Our brains haven't had a lot of time to catch up to consume and deal with a globe's worth, an entire human population's worth of news, potential dangers, all of that stuff. And so I just found myself thinking, I was like, man, I was going to ask Patrick to talk about this, but like, I have things that I turn to cope with that. I mean, and coping is the thing, right? I mean, a lot of what you're talking about and have talked about so far is this way in which, like, to have a life built in such a way that when this new information or when I begin to feel this discomfort, because I felt uncomfortable this morning in that. And I'm guessing when you were in middle school and just being a middle school student or whatever, and your friends started introducing beers from your buddy's, dad's garage or whatever, and like knowing your story and how this thing progresses, these things that we don't want to feel.
Yeah.
Would you speak to can you just explain? Because I mean, some of the philosophical stuff you and I just got into, like, man, we're standing on the shoulders of all this experience and stuff that you already know. Can you back up and walk through what is coping? What is that all about? How does it work?
I'll try.
And
I'll try to tie this up, all of this together.
Oh, you don't even have to do that. I'm just curious.
I think I can. Hopefully, if this makes sense. But I'm thinking about the word that's coming to mind. As you just described the political landscape and just everything that we've gone through as a society, just as human beings over the last 5 years. It's extremely overwhelming.
Yeah,
and I think about that, the idea of overwhelm. And just the technology and the phones and just this information overload. Like our brains are not even close to being evolved to catch up to, the technology advancements that have happened over the last 20 years. And the access to constant just information downloads. Like we're not. Our brains weren't made for that stuff. And when you talk about, kind of where this comes from and how we learn to cope, and I think about, our early days as, infants and children and our evolutionary need to be able to protect ourselves from overwhelm. And again, this is probably a conversation for another day, but I'll try to explain it as quickly as I can. But this idea of attachment, that I try to work from in the clinical world, and where I think a lot of the underlying issues come from that lead to addiction and mental health issues, it primarily has to do with what we call attachment or secure attachment, or healthy attachment. And when we don't have that growing up, it usually leads to us trying to find that comfort and safety, or coping with overwhelm in other ways other than through human connection. And I'll try to explain at least my understanding or how I see how this kind of develops. And I think we've talked about this before. But anyway, when we're born, human beings need to be taken care of by another human being more than any other mammal on the planet. Like, we have to be taken care of longer than any other mammal in order for us to survive. So, hypothetically, just pretend that, I'm born and you're my mother. And you're the thing that I come to understand is in charge of keeping me alive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm intuitively, as an infant, going to start picking up on your energy, your facial expressions, your responses to my whims, in a way that's going to, increase the probability of me surviving.
Mm-hmm.
So, if, you hear me cry in the middle of the night and you come to pick me up and I can sense that you're overwhelmed or you're angry or frustrated with the fact that I'm crying, I'm going to pick up on that signal. And as one of my favorite mentors says, I'm not going to stop crying, I'm going to stop needing. And what that means is that my little brain will start to develop ways to cope in unhealthy ways from the time I'm an infant. And what I'll do is I will take that need to be held or take that need to be comforted or fed or whatever, and it'll essentially get split off and go into my unconscious because I'm afraid to show that part of me to you because I might be abandoned. And if I'm abandoned by you, my primary caregiver, guess what happens? I die.
So you've got to adapt.
Yeah.
To make sure, because there is a risk.
Exactly.
That I could reject you or cease to give you care.
Yeah. So I'm picking up on your energy from the time I come out of the womb. And that's how my little personality develops. And that's how I learn how to operate within relationship in the world. Is through those first, usually that first primary relationship. But how this has to do with overwhelm is that we start, and again, this is probably too complex to get, and I'm not good enough at talking about this stuff I understand it intuitively, but I don't teach it, so it's hard for me to
articulate
express it.
Yeah.
But anyway, a lot of what we do psychologically is to protect ourselves from overwhelm. So when we start to get a little bit older and we start to develop thought, and we start to tell ourselves stories within our head, a lot of times those stories are actually protecting us from some type of emotional overwhelm.
Okay.
Which is essentially the same thing that drugs do, or
whatever these coping things.
or whatever these coping mechanisms are. So like when I got, and I can use my story as an example. When I got into middle school and substances started to come into play, like I didn't even know that I was using that stuff to cope. Like,
sure.
I didn't even.
It was fun?
Yeah, it was fun. I didn't even feel overwhelmed at that time in my life. And one of the reasons that I probably didn't feel that way is because I had created a narrative within my mind of why everything was still okay. And these are the denial mechanisms that we build in through our psychological processes throughout our entire life that end up leading us to points where we're living in these unhealthy ways and we don't even know it. Because we have these underlying thought processes like, oh, everybody does it. Oh, I'm fine. Oh, I'm not sad. I'm just whatever. And what we end up with when we get into our 30s and 40s is a bunch of crap that's not true. that we've actually been using our whole life, or this mechanism to protect ourselves from feeling overwhelmed. But eventually it gets to the point where it doesn't work anymore. You know?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same idea when it comes to substances. Like for me, when I was 13, 14, I could drink a beer and it turned me into it was like a performance enhancing drug. Same with opiates. Like it washed away all that fear and anxiety that I really didn't even know that I had. But then over time, it stops working.
Right. You got to up the game.
Yeah, you got to up the game. And you got to use more. And it's the same thing for us psychologically, and we just build this denial over the course of our lives, and just builds and builds and builds. And that's when you hear people, that's why people have to work for so long in therapy to unpack all this stuff, because we built so many defenses up. And this goes back to the political landscape stuff. It's like, another thing that one of my mentors likes to say, it's like if you, if somebody's building a wall to keep you out and you start banging on the wall, like, what are they going to do? They're going to build another wall, or they're going to build the wall higher, and that's what we do with each other. We try to forcefully, and that's what, we work on at like Sauna House and in my counseling practice. It's like, it's my job to know what your defenses are. And to be able to do everything I can to create a safe environment where those defenses are no longer needed. Because if those psychological defenses aren't withdrawn, we're never going to get to the truth. You're never going to be able to feel what you need to feel. Just like we were when we were little kids and we needed to cry and be held and needed to feel safe and loved and cared for. And a lot of us weren't. And it's not our parents' fault. People get overwhelmed.
Oh, yeah. The mom is overwhelmed when she comes to pick you up.
Exactly.
She's dealing with all these news,
it's
too.
3 a.m.
Yeah.
She just fell asleep. You start crying. But when we're infants, that big person is the only person we know.
Sure.
Like, they are life.
They're our connection to reality.
Exactly. They are reality.
Yeah, they are reality.
So the only thing logical for us to experience is like, hey, if this person's overwhelmed, I must be causing it. And that's where that shame starts to set in, and it's too overwhelming.
Dude, so like, what?
I hope that made sense.
No, it does. I think it does make sense. I think what it does for me, though, it's like, well, dang, like, man, I have no control over what my attachment style was, how I was treated as an infant, or how my parents reacted to anything in my environment. Like when something reacted, I can think about all these stories I've heard that, like, even when a dog barks, at a certain age, you start looking to your parents to see how they're reacting so you can learn how you're supposed to react to this stimulus, right? So if that stuff's out of our control, and I mean, what about now, like the teens that are listening, these adults that are listening, like, man, what's the starting point? Am I trying to be curious about, wow, where am I coping? Where am I trying to avoid these difficult feelings?
Yeah.
Is it like, I don't know.
I guess, and I don't, and again,
and maybe there's no one answer.
I don't want to get down the rabbit hole even more than we already are. But like, when I even think about that idea or word coping, that almost to me, it makes me think about the idea that feelings shouldn't be however they are. So like if I don't know how to articulate this, but I guess one of the fundamental problems when we're infants is that we're not supposed to feel a certain way. And if we continue to look at the idea of feeling that way, as if we need to cope with something because it's a quote unquote negative emotion, That in and of itself can be a way of avoiding it almost.
Sure, yeah. Like I'm not supposed to be feeling this.
Yeah.
So how do I stop feeling this?
Yeah, and I think that's the wrong approach. I think it's how can we create space to feel whatever we need to feel, and maybe that's the same thing as coping.
Yeah.
But I and again I think about this because I work with so many young adults, especially men, that have so much shame around feeling certain ways about certain things, and they're like, how do I not, I shouldn't feel like this, and I'm like, no, you feel however you feel.
Yeah.
And I feel like so many guys struggle with that idea of anytime any kind of negative emotion comes up, they feel like they have to like do something with it to change it. Instead of sitting with it and getting curious about it and allowing ourselves to feel it. Like I was literally just in a session this morning before I came over here with a guy, and we were talking about this exact thing. And the fact that it's not the thought or emotion that's the issue, it's the fact that we're scared of it. Because when we're scared of it, it's like pouring fuel on a fire. Instead of just sitting with it and like, well, why can't we just be sad?
Yeah, I think and I have another mutual friend of ours who says she doesn't even like to call them negative emotions anymore. She just calls them difficult emotions. It's just because we don't want to feel these things. And I've also heard emotions referred to as like almost like lights on your dash, like letting you know something's going on. It's not good or bad. It's like, yeah, man, there's something like happening and you should be aware of it. And this emotion is telling you a narrative, one of these narratives you're living out of is being challenged or undermined, or something you believe to be true about yourself, something you believe to be true about the person you're with or the world you live in or your circumstances. Something is like, whoa, this feels this light comes on, boom, you're feeling that. And it's not right or wrong. You just, here's some information about something that's happening in your world. I think it's an interesting thing. And when you come and do these events for us, like one of the events you come and do for us is around guardrails, around this idea of, wow, how can we, and it's funny, I'm even rethinking this now in our conversation, but how can we become, I don't know, how can we begin to pre-manage? Listen, you're going to feel difficult things. Yeah. You're probably not going to want to feel them, and you're going to begin to look for, it's almost like a hole in the dam or something. Like I need to find something to plug in there so I don't feel that coming through, and to numb, and this whole thing of numbing and, the word coping. And I guess I just keep coming back to, gosh, these ideas are huge. These are big ideas. And so anyone listening, it's so funny. I feel compelled, and maybe it's because I'm new at this podcasting thing, or it's that educator in me. Like, man, what do we do? What do I do with this information? You know what I'm saying? Like today, people listening.
And I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that I've kind of somewhat felt has been helpful is looking at it from a different angle and talking more about how do we create space so we can feel whatever we need to feel,
Yeah.
Safely. And if I look at that, like from the fundamental idea of attachment, it's like if we were allowed to feel whatever we needed to feel when we were infants.
Without fear of losing
of losing anything.
Yeah.
Because then we can be who we really are. We can show up however we show up and not feel like we need to mask it or make up a story about it or use a substance to suppress it or whatever.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like that, from all the stuff that I've studied and worked on, and again, I'm not an expert.
Right.
I'm still trying to figure this out. But like it to me, that stuff makes the most sense.
Yeah.
And I've always intuitively known that when I can show up however I show up, and I can allow myself to feel the way that I feel and tell the truth about what I'm thinking without any kind of judgment, if I have a space to do that, that always feels the most healing. It feels the most authentic. I feel the most connected. I feel the safest. And I have yet to find anything better than that.
Yeah, facts.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like, to me, how can that not be the best way to go about this?
Sure.
And, like, again, and this is just how I think, but, like, there's going to be times when we need to plug the dam.
Yeah.
You know? And we need to practice harm reduction. And, hey, like, you really want to, you know, go out and get drunk? Well, it may be a better idea for you to eat a gummy instead. Like, fine. That's going to prevent you from going out and doing something horrific to yourself. Like, then that's what you need to do. Maybe we're not there. Maybe you can't feel your feelings yet. Like, I don't want that to be the message that I'm putting across. I look at things very idealistically. And for my own recovery, I like to aim for the best possible like brightest star I possibly can.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm gonna fall short, and I'm not gonna be able to do that all the time. But it's good to know, like, hey, I should probably aim at that one. You know,
rather than just let me take care of this one little symptom. Let me start with where do I really ultimately want to be, instead of just like, I just don't want to be addicted to this anymore. I don't want this to be harming my relationships with my family. It's like, how can I aim to become this holistic individual? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
When you talk about that North Star?
Yeah.
So, gosh, man. So, yeah, somebody's listening right now, they're pretty sure they're addicted to something. They may just have realized, wow, this is probably because of something I maybe can't even articulate, something I don't want to feel, but now I'm deep in this. What is that? What is that first step?
Find somebody to talk to about it.
Yeah.
I mean, find a mirror.
You
know, find somebody that you feel safe with, that you trust. And if you're not there yet, find somebody that you think you might be able to get there with someday, and start there.
Yeah.
You know, because we can't do this alone. We need support. We need people that that love us, that we can bounce up back to the beginning.
Yeah.
You know, this is hard stuff.
Yeah, man.
You know,
and I know it's so complex to just give one
answer.
answer.
Yeah, it's super complex, and it's also, but like, you know, until we take responsibility for this, and again, I'll speak for myself. If I didn't understand some of this stuff and like really put effort into living like this and being honest and being able to get into my body and feel what I'm feeling and accept it and tell the truth to people that I trust in my life, everything that's going on right now in the world and everything that we have access to that can numb us out, like, we're in an extremely vulnerable spot. Because there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of stuff that's super addictive, that's right at our fingertips, that's ready to numb us out. And if we're not vigilant, if I'm not vigilant, and I'm not paying attention to this stuff, I can get underwater real quick. You know, whether it's food, whether it's sex, whether it's gambling, whether it's power, whether it's whatever. You know, whatever the thing is that can intoxicate me temporarily,
so I can feel something else,
is always going to have some type of negative consequence attached to it, and we're gonna pay the piper eventually. And it's like, you know, we had Dr. Steve Scanlon on Champagne Problems. I think he was our second guest, and he was talking about alcohol and it like being a credit card, and it's like, you know, when you drink, you're using tomorrow's feel-good chemicals, and you're going in debt. And that goes for any kind of process or thing that we can engage in that's using tomorrow's feel-good chemicals. And there's a billion different ways to do that.
Yeah. I've heard, like, if it takes very little energy to feel that good, then it's probably really bad for you.
Yeah. But you're going to pay for it.
Yeah, you're going to pay for it ultimately.
And
that
that's
bill
the
comes.
thing. And with the way that things are set up in our society, like, there's always a harder hit. You know? And that's like what happened to me. It's like the painkillers weren't enough. The, alcohol wasn't enough. The weed wasn't enough. And it just progressed over time until it was completely out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, I'm 28 years old, laying in a bed in a treatment center,
Yeah.
And again, people are getting help earlier and they're talking about this stuff more. We're having conversations like this.
Yeah.
And this is really, really hard.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to lay in our bed and scroll through our phone and hate people and, and I feel like I almost fall prey to this, or not prey to it, so it's my own doing, but like, it's really easy for me to sit here and like point out all the problems that we have in our society.
Sure. Yeah. Instead of just doing the really difficult work, or maybe hopefully in both of us in conjunction with doing really difficult work in ourselves, to at least have power over or change over.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I've, one of the things that I've come to understand is like nobody's coming to fix me.
Yeah.
Nobody's coming to save me. If I want a better life, or if I want anything to change, I'm responsible for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I refuse to be a victim.
Yeah.
In my own life, because if that's the mode of being that I'm showing up with, like there's all kinds of reasons for me to check out and just give up. And I've done that, and I've been through that hell, and I don't want any part of that.
Word. Well, dude, we're gonna have to have you back, like, because I feel like there's so many things that we just barely touched on. But I know your time's important.
I hope some of that made sense.
Yeah, man. I mean, I was here in the midst of it. It made sense in the moment.
Okay.
So, yeah, I appreciate it.
I hope somebody got something out of it.
Yeah. Love having you on, buddy. I love you.
Love you too. Thanks.
Yeah, man.